read Looking for Alaska or watched it, I'll read the blurb to you. Miles Halter's whole life has been one big non-event until he meets Alaska Young. Gorgeous, clever and undoubtedly screwed up, Alaska draws Miles into a reckless world and irrevocably steals his heart. For Miles, nothing can ever be the same again. Rude. I'm like, Adam, if you're in the chat, will you bring me a drink? Anyone who lives in Everton, you want to bring me a drink? No, I'm joking, please don't do that. But let's go. "136 days before, the week before I left my family in Florida and the rest of my minor life to go to boarding school in Alabama, my mother insisted on throwing me a going away party. To say that I had low expectations would be an understatement, would be to underestimate the matter dramatically. Although I was more or less forced to invite all of my school friends, i.e. the ratbag bunch of drama people and English geeks I sat with by social necessity in the cavernous cafeteria of my public school. I knew they wouldn't come. Still, my mother persevered, awash in the delusion that I had kept my popularity secret from her all these years. She cooked a small mountain of artichoke dip. She festooned our living room in green and yellow streamers, the colour of my new school. She bought 24 champagne poppers and placed them around the edge of our coffee table. And when the final Friday came, when my packing was mostly done, she sat with my dad and me on the living room couch at 4:56 p.m. and patiently awaited the arrival of the goodbye to Miles cavalry. Said cavalry consisted of exactly 2 people, Marie Lawson, a tiny blonde with rectangular glasses, and her chunky, to put it charitable, boyfriend Will. "Hey Miles," Marie said as she sat down. "Hey," I said. "How was your summer?" Will asked. "Okay, yours?" "Good. We did Jesus Christ Superstar. I helped with the sets and Marie did lights," said Will. "That's cool," I nodded, knowingly about the exhausted our conversational topics. I might have asked a question about Jesus Christ Superstar, except 1, I didn't know what it was, and 2, I didn't care to learn. 3, I never really excelled at small talk. My mum, however, can talk small for hours, and so she extended the awkwardness by asking them about their rehearsal schedule, and how the show had gone, and whether it was a success. "I guess it was," Marie said. "A lot of people came, I guess." Marie was the sort of person to guess a lot. Finally, Will said, "Well, we just dropped by to say goodbye. I've got to get Marie home by 6. Have fun at boarding school, Miles." "Thanks," I answered, relieved. The only thing worse than having a party that no one attends is having a party attended only by 2 vastly, deeply uninteresting people. They left, and so I sat with my parents and stared at the blank TV and wanted to turn it on, but I knew I shouldn't. I could feel them both looking at me, waiting for me to burst into tears or something, as if I hadn't known all along that it would go precisely like this. But I had known. I could feel their pity as they scooped artichoke dip with chips intended for my imaginary friends, but they needed pity more than I did. I wasn't disappointed. My expectations had been met. "Is this why you want to leave, Miles?" Mum asked. I mulled it over a moment, careful not to look at her. No," I said. "Well, why then?" she asked. This was not the first time she had posed the question. Mum was not particularly keen on letting me go to boarding school and had made no secret of it. "Because of me?" my dad asked. He attended Culver Creek, the same boarding school which I was headed, as had both of my brothers and all of their kids. I think he liked the idea of me following in his footsteps. My uncles had told me stories about how famous my dad had been on campus for having simultaneously raised hell and aced all of his classes. That sounded like a better life than the one I had in Florida, but no, it wasn't because of Dad, not exactly. "Hold on," I said. I went into Dad's study and found his biography of Francis Rabelais, I think is the name. I liked reading biographies of writers, even if, as the case with Monsieur Rabelais, I'd never read any of their actual writing. I flipped to the back, found the highlighted quote, "Never use a highlighter in my books." My dad had told me 1,000 times, but how else are you supposed to find what you're looking for? "So this guy," I said, standing in the doorway of the living room, "Francis, he was this poet, and his last words were, 'I go to seek the great perhaps.' That's why I'm going, so I don't have to wait until I die to start seeking a great perhaps," and then quieted them. I was after a great perhaps, and they knew as well as I did that I wasn't going to find it with the likes of Will and Marie. I sat back down on the couch between my mum and dad, and my dad put his arms around me, and we stayed there like that, quiet on the couch together for a long time, until it seemed okay to turn on the TV, and then we ate the artichoke dip for dinner and watched the History Channel as going away parties go. It certainly could have been worse. 128 days before. Florida was plenty hot, certainly, and humid too. Hot enough that your clothes stuck to you like scotch tape and sweat dripped like tears from your forehead into your eyes. But it was only hot outside. I generally only went outside to walk from one air-conditioned location to another. This did not prepare me for the unique sort of heat that one encounters 15 miles south of Birmingham, Alabama, at Culver Creek Preparatory School. My parents' SUV was parked in the grass just a few feet outside my dorm room, room 43, but each time I took those few steps to and from the car to unload what now seemed like far too much stuff, the sun burnt through my clothes and into my skin with a vicious frost that made me genuinely fear hellfire. Between mum and dad and me, it only took a few minutes to unload the car, but my un-air-conditioned dorm room, although blessedly out of the sunshine, was modestly cooler. The room surprised me. I pictured plush carpet, wood-panelled walls, Victorian furniture. Aside from one luxury, a private bathroom, I got box, with cinder block walls coated with thick layers of white and green paint, green and white checkered linoleum floor. The place looked more like a hospital than a dorm room of my fantasies. A bunk bed of unfinished wood with vinyl mattresses was pushed against the room's back window. The desks and dressers and bookshelves were all attached to the walls in order to prevent creative floor planning and no air conditioning. I sat on the lower bunk while mum opened the trunk, grabbed a stack of the biographies my dad had agreed to part with and placed them on the bookshelves. "I can unpack, mum," I said. My dad stood. He was ready to go. "Let me at least make your bed," mum said. "No, really, I can do it, it's okay." Because you simply cannot draw these things out forever. At some point you just pull off the band-aid and it hurts, but then it's over and you're relieved. "God will miss you," mum said suddenly, stepping through the minefield of suitcases to get to the bed. I stood and hugged her. My dad walked over too, and we formed a sort of huddle. It was too hot and we were too sweaty for a hug to last terribly long. I knew I ought to cry, but I'd lived with my parents for 16 years and a trial separation seemed overdue. "Don't worry," I smiled. Eyes are gonna learn how to talk right southern," mum laughed. "Don't do anything stupid," my dad said. "Okay. No drugs, no drinking, no cigarettes." As an alum of Culver Creek, he had done those things I only heard about, the secret parties, streaking through hayfields. He always whined about how it was all boys back then. Drugs, drinking and cigarettes. It had taken him a while to kick smoking, but his badass days were now well behind him. "I love you," they both blurted out simultaneously. It needed to be said, but the words made the whole thing horribly uncomfortable, like watching your grandparents kiss. "I love you too, I'll call every Sunday." Our rooms had no phone lines, but my parents had requested I be placed in a room near the Culver Creek's 5 payphones. They hugged me again, mum, then dad, and it was over. Out the back window I watched them drive the winding road off of campus. I should have felt a gooey sentimental sadness, perhaps, but mostly I just wanted to cool off. So I grabbed one of the desk chairs and sat down outside my door in the shade of the overhearing eaves, waiting for a breeze that never arrived. The air outside sat as still and oppressive as the air inside. I stared out over my new digs. 6 one-storey buildings, each with 16 dorm rooms, were arranged in a hexagon around a large circle of grass. It looked like an oversized motel. Everywhere, boys and girls hugged and smiled and walked together. I vaguely hoped that someone would come up and talk to me. I imagined the conversation. "Hey, is this your first year?" "Yeah, I'm from Florida." "That's so cool, so you're used to the heat." I wouldn't be used to this heat if I were from Hades, I'd joke. I'd make a good first impression. "Oh, he's funny, that guy Miles is a riot." That didn't happen, of course. Things never happen like that. Things never happen like I imagined them. Bored, I went back inside, took off my shirt, lay down on the heat-soaked vinyl of the lower bunk mattress and closed my eyes. I'd never been born again with the baptism and weeping and all that, but it couldn't feel much better than being born again as a guy with no known past. I thought of the people I'd read about. John F. Kennedy, James Joyce, Humphrey Bogart, who went to boarding school, and their adventures. Kennedy, for example, loved pranks. I thought of the great perhaps and the things that might happen and the people I might meet and who my roommate might be. I'd gotten a letter a few weeks before that gave me his name, Chip Martin, but no other information. Whoever Chip Martin was, I hoped to God he would bring an arsenal of high-powered fans, because I hadn't packed even one and I could already feel my sweat pooling on the vinyl mattress, which disgusted me so much that I stopped thinking and got off my ass to find a towel to wipe up the sweat with. And then I thought, well, before the adventure comes the unpacking. I managed to tape a map of the world to the wall and get most of my clothes into drawers before I noticed that the hot, moist air made even the walls sweat. I decided that now was not the time for manual labour. Now was the time for a magnificently cold shower. The small bathroom contained a huge full-length mirror behind the door, and so I could not escape the reflection of my naked self as I leaned in to turn on the shower faucet. My skinniness always surprised me. My thin arms didn't seem to get much bigger as they moved from wrist to shoulder, and my chest lacked any hint of either fat or muscle, and I felt embarrassed and wondered if something could be done about the mirror. I pulled open the plain white shower curtain and ducked into the stall. Unfortunately, the shower seemed to have been designed for someone approximately 3 feet 7 inches tall, so the cold water hit my lower rib cage with all the force of a dripping faucet. To wet my sweat-soaked face, I had to spread my legs and squat significantly. Surely John F. Kennedy, who was 6 feet tall according to his biography, my height exactly, did not have to squat at his boarding school. No, this was a different beast entirely, and as dribbling showers slowly soaked my body, I wondered whether I could find the great perhaps here at all, or whether I had made a grand miscalculation. When I opened the bathroom door after my shower, a towel wrapped around my waist, I was a short, muscular guy with a shock of brown hair. He was hauling a gigantic army green duffel bag through the door of my room. He stood 5 feet nothing and was well built, like a scale model of Adonis, and with him arrived the stink of stale cigarette smoke. Great, I thought, I'm meeting my roommate naked. He heaved the duffel into my room, closed the door and walked over to me. I'm Chip Martin, he announced in a deep voice, the voice of a radio DJ. Before I could respond, he added, I'd shake your hand, but I think you should hold on damn tight to that towel till you get some clothes on. I laughed and nodded my head at him. That's cool, right? The nod, and said, I'm Miles Holter, nice to meet you. Miles, as in, I go before I sleep, he asked me. Huh? It's a Robert Frost poem. You never read him? Excuse me. I shook my head no. Consider yourself lucky, he smiled. I grabbed some clean underwear, a pair of blue Adidas soccer shorts and a white t-shirt, mumbled that I'd be back in a second and ducked back into the bathroom. So much for a good first impression. So where are your parents? I asked from the bathroom. My parents? The father's in California right now, maybe sitting in his lazy boy, maybe driving his truck. Either way, he's drinking. My mother is probably just now turning off campus. Oh, I said. Dressed now, not sure how to respond to such personal information. I shouldn't have asked, I guess, if I didn't want to know. Chip grabbed some sheets and tossed them on the top of the bunk. I'm a top bunk man, I hope that doesn't bother you. No, whatever is fine. I see you decorated the place, he said, gesturing towards the world map. I like it. And then he started naming countries. He spoke in a monotone as if he'd done it 1,000 times before. Afghanistan, Albania, Algeria, American Samoa, Andorra, and so on. He got through the A's before looking up and noticing my incredulous stare. I could do the rest, but I'd probably bore you. Something I learned over the summer. God, you can't imagine how boring New Hope, Alabama is in the summertime. Like watching soybeans grow. Where are you from, by the way? Florida, I said. Never been. That's pretty amazing, the countries thing, I said. Yeah, everybody's got talent. I can memorise things and you can... I know a lot of people's last words. It was an indulgence, learning last words. Other people had chocolate, I had dying declarations. Example? I like Henrik Ibsen's. He was a playwright. I know a lot about Ibsen, but I'd never read any of his plays. I didn't like reading plays, I like reading biographies. Yeah, I know who he was, said Chip. Right, well he'd been sick for a while and his nurse said to him, he seemed to be feeling better this morning, and Ibsen looked at her and said, on the contrary, and then he died. Chip laughed. That's morbid, but I like it. He told me he was in 3rd year at Culver Creek. He had started at 9th grade, the 1st year at school, and was now a junior like me. A scholarship kid, he got a full ride. He'd heard was the best school in Alabama, so he wrote his application essay about how he wanted to go to school where he could read long books. The problem, he said, The problem, he said in the essay, was that his dad would always hit him with the books in his house. Chip kept the books short and paperback for his own safety. His parents got divorced sophomore year. He liked the creek, as he called it, but you have to be careful here, with students and teachers. And I hate being careful, he smirked. I hated being careful too, or wanted to at least. He told me this while ripping through his duffel bag, throwing clothes into drawers and with reckless abandon. Chip did not believe in having a sock drawer or a t-shirt drawer. He believed that all drawers were created equal and filled each with whatever fit. My mother would have died. As soon as he finished unpacking, Chip hit roughly on the shoulder and said, "I hope you're stronger than you look," and walked out the door, leaving it open behind him. He peeked his head back in a few seconds later and saw me standing still. "Welcome on, Miles, to go halter. We got shit to do." We made it out way to the TV room, which according to Chip contained the only cable TV on campus. Over the summer it served as a storage unit, packed nearly to the ceiling with couches, fridges and rolled up carpets. The TV room undiluted with kids trying to find a haul away for their stuff. Chip said hello to a few people but didn't introduce me. As he wandered through the couch-stucked maze, I stood near the door trying my best not to block pairs of roommates as they manoeuvred furniture through the narrow front door. It took 10 minutes for Chip to find his stuff and an hour more for us to make 4 trips back and forth across the dorm circle between the TV room and room 43. By the end I wanted to crawl into Chip's mini fridge and sleep for 1,000 years, but Chip seemed immune to both fatigue and heat stroke. I sat down on his couch. I found it lying on a curb in my neighbourhood a couple of years ago, he said. He said of the couch as he worked on setting up my PlayStation 2 like me. Basically, you've got 2 groups here, he explained, speaking with increasing urgency. You've got the regular boarders like me, and then you've got the weekday warriors. They board here, but they're all rich kids who live in Birmingham and go home to their parents' air-conditioned mansions every weekend. Those are the cool kids. I don't like them and they don't like me. And so if you came here thinking that you were hot shit at public school, you'll be hot shit here. You'd best not be seen with me. You did go to public school, didn't you? I said, absent-mindedly. I began picking the cracks in the couch's leather, digging my fingers into foamy whiteness. Right, you did probably, because if you'd have gone to private school, your freaking shorts would fit, he laughed. I wore my shorts just below my hips, which I thought was cool. Finally, I said, yeah, I went to public school, but I wasn't hot shit there, Chip, I was regular shit. Ha, that's good, and don't call me Chip, call me Colonel. I stifled a laugh. The Colonel? Yeah, the Colonel, and we'll call you, Pudge. Pudge, the Colonel said, because you're skinny, it's called irony. Heard of it? Now let's go get some cigarettes and start this year off right. He walked out the room again, just assuming I'd follow. This time I did. Mercifully, the sun was descending towards the horizon. We walked 5 doors down to room 48. A dry ease board was taped to the door using duct tape, and in blue marker it read, Alaska has a single. The Colonel explained to me that 1, this was Alaska's room, and 2, she had a single room because the girl who was supposed to be her roommate got kicked out at the end of last year, and that 3, Alaska had cigarettes. Although the Colonel neglected to ask whether 4 I smoked, which 5 I didn't. He knocked once loudly through the door. A voice screamed, "Oh my God, come in you short little man, because I have the best story." And we walked in. I turned to close the door behind me and the Colonel shook his head and said, "After 7 you have to leave the door open if you're in a girl's room." But I barely heard him because the hottest girl in all of human history was standing before me in cut-off jeans and a peach tank top, and she was talking over the Colonel, talking loud and fast. So first day of summer, I'm in Grand Knoll Vine Station with a boy named Justin, and we're at his house watching TV on the couch. And mind you, I'm already dating Jake. Actually, I'm still dating him, miraculously enough, but Justin is a friend of mine from when I was a kid, so we're watching TV and literally chatting about the SATs or something, and Justin puts his arm around me and I think, oh, that's nice, we've been friends for so long, this is totally comfortable. And we're just chatting and I'm in the middle of a sentence about analogies or something, and like a hawk he reaches down and honks my boob. Honk. A much too firm 2 to 3 second honk. And the first thing I thought was, okay, how do I excrete this claw from my boob before it leaves permanent marks? And the second thing I thought was, God, I can't wait to tell Takumi and the Colonel. The Colonel laughed. I stared stunned, partly by the force of the voice emanating from the petite but God curvy girl, and partly by the gigantic stack of books that lined her walls. Her library filled her bookshelves and then overflowed into waist-high stacks of books everywhere. piled haphazardly against the walls. As if one of them moved, I thought the domino effect could engulf the three of us in an asphyxiating mass of literature. "Who's the guy that's not laughing at my very funny story?" she asked. "Alright, Alaska, this is Pudge. Pudge memorises people's last words. Pudge, this is all Colonel. So Alaska, sell us some cigarettes," and then somehow the Colonel talked me into paying $5 for a pack of Marlboro Lights I had no intention of ever smoking. He asked Alaska to join us, but she said I'd have to find Takumi and tell him about the hunk. She turned to me and asked, "Have you seen him?" I had no idea whether I'd seen Takumi since I had no idea who he was. I just shook my head. "Alright, meet you at the lake in a few minutes then," the Colonel nodded. At the edge of the lake, just before the sandy, and the Colonel told me, fake beach, we sat down in Adirondack swing. I made the obligatory joke, "Don't grab my boob." The Colonel gave an obligatory laugh, and then asked, oops, oh my gosh, my fingers are dry, if I smoke. I'd never smoked a cigarette, but when in Rome, "Is it safe here?" "Not really," he said, then lit a cigarette and handed it to me. I inhaled, coughed, wheezed, gasped for breath, coughed again, considered vomiting, grabbed the swinging bench, head spinning, and threw the cigarette to the ground and stomped it, convinced my great perhaps did not involve cigarette smoke much. He laughed, then pointed to the white speck across the lake and said, "See that?" "Yeah," I said. "What is that, a bird?" "It's the swan," he said. "Whoa, a school with a swan." "That swan is a spawn of Satan. Never get closer to it than we are now." "Why?" "It has some issues with people. It was abused or something. It'll rip you to pieces. The Eagle put it there to keep us from walking around the lake to smoke." The Eagle, Mr. Starn's code name. The Eagle, the Dean of Students. Most of the teachers live on campus and they'll bust you, but only the Eagle lives in the dorm circle and he sees all. He can smell a cigarette from like 5 miles. "Isn't his house back there?" I asked, pointing to it. I could see the house quite clearly despite the darkness, so it followed he could probably see us. "Yeah, but he doesn't really go into Blitzerg mode until classes start," Chip said nonchalantly. "Hello, I'm nearly finished."
Hi.
"Hi. God, if I get in trouble, my parents will kill me. Did you bring me a drink? If I give you my card, will you run to JR's and get me a bottle of water?"
Do you want this?
No, I don't like 7-Up. Babe! Babe! Oh, he's actually going. That's so sweet. "God, if I get in trouble, my parents will kill me," I said. "I suspect you're exaggerating, but look, you're going to get in trouble. 99% of the time, your parents never have to know, though. The school doesn't want your parents to think you became a fuck-up here any more than you want your parents to think you're a fuck-up." He blew a thin stream of smoke forcefully toward the lake. I had to admit he looked cool doing it, taller somehow. "Anyway, when you get into trouble, just don't tell on anyone. I mean, I hate the rich snots here with a fervent passion. I usually reserve only for dental work on my father, but that doesn't mean I would rat them out. Pretty much the only important thing is never, never, never rat." "Okay," I said. Although I wondered if someone punches me in the face, I'm supposed to insist that I ran into a door. It seemed a little stupid. "How'd you deal with bullies and arseholes if you can't get them into trouble?" I didn't ask Chip though. "Alright, Pudge, we've reached the point in the evening when I'm obliged to go and find my girlfriend, so give me a few of those cigarettes, you'll never smoke anyway, and I'll see you later." I decided to hang out on the swing for a while, half because the heat had finally dissipated into a pleasant, if muggy 80-something, and because half of me thought Alaska might show up. But almost as soon as the Colonel left, the Buggeros no-see-ums, which for the record you can see, mosquitoes hovered around me in such numbers that the tiny noise of their rubbing wings sounded cacophonous. I don't actually know what that means. And then I decided to smoke. Now, I did think the smoke will drive the bugs away. To some degree, it did. I'd be lying though if I claimed I became a smoker to ward off insects. I became a smoker because 1, I was in Adirondack swing by myself, and 2, I had cigarettes, and 3, I figured if everyone else could smoke a cigarette without coughing, I could damn well too. In short, I didn't have very good reason, so yeah, let's just say 4, it was the bugs. I made it through 3 entire drags before I felt nauseous and dizzy and only semi-pleasantly buzzed. I got up to leave. As I stood, a voice behind me said, "So, do you really memorise last words?" She ran up beside me and grabbed my shoulder and pushed me back onto the porch swing. "Yeah," I said, and then hesitantly added, "You want to quiz me?" "JFK," she said. "That's obvious," I answered. "Oh, is it now?" she asked. "No, those were his last words. Someone said, 'Mr. President, you sure you can't say Dallas doesn't love you?' And then he said, 'That's obvious,' and then he got shot." She laughed. God, that's awful. I shouldn't laugh, but I will. And then she laughed again. Okay, Mr. Famous Last Words Boy, I have one for you. She reached into her overstuffed backpack and pulled out a book. Gabriel Garcia Marquez, The General in His Labyrinth, absolutely one of my favourites. It's about Simon Bolivar. I didn't know who Simon Bolivar was, but she didn't give me time to ask. It's a historical novel, so I don't know if this is true, but in the book, do you know what his last words were? No, you don't, but I'm about to tell you, senior parting remarks. And then she lit a cigarette and sucked on it so hard for so long that I thought the entire thing might burn off in one drag. She exhaled and read to me. He, that Simon Bolivar, was shaken by the overwhelming revelation that the headlong race between the misfortunes and his dreams was at the moment reaching the finish line. The rest was darkness. Damn it, he sighed. How will I ever get out of this labyrinth? I knew great last words when I heard them, and I made a mental note to get a hold of a biography of the Simon Bolivar fellow. Beautiful last words, but I don't quite understand. So what's the labyrinth? I asked her. And there was a good time as any to say that she was beautiful. In the dark beside me, she smelled of sweat and sunshine and vanilla. And on that thin moon night, I could see a little more than her silhouette, except for when she smoked, when the burning cherry of the cigarette washed her face in a pale red light. But even in the dark, I could see her eyes, fierce emeralds. She had the kind eyes that predisposed you to supporting her every endeavour. And not just beautiful, but hot too, with breast in and against her tank top. Her curved legs swinging back and forth beneath the swing, flip-flops dangling from her eccentric, electrically painted toes. It was right then, between when I asked about the labyrinth and when she answered me, that I realised the importance of curves, of the 1,000 times where girls' bodies ease from one place to another, from the arc of the foot to the ankle to the calf, to the hip, waist and breast and neck, to the ski-sloped nose and forehead, to shoulder, to the concave arch of the back to the butt, and etc. I'd noticed curves before, of course, but I'd never quite apprehended their significance. Her mouth closed enough to me that I could feel her breath, warmer than air. She said, "That's the mystery, isn't it? Is the labyrinth living or dying? Which is trying to escape, the world or the end of it?" I waited for her to keep talking, but after a while it became obvious she wanted an answer. I don't know," I said finally. "Have you really read all of those books in your room?" She laughed. "Oh God, no, I've maybe read a third of them, but I'm going to read them all. I call it my life's library. Every summer since I was little I've gone to garage sales and bought all the books that looked interesting. So I always have something to read, but there's so much to do, cigarettes to smoke, sex to have, swings to swing on. I'll have more time for reading when I'm old and boring." She told me that I reminded her of the Colonel when he came to Culver Creek. They were freshmen together and said both scholarship kids, with, as she put it, a shared interest in booze and mischief. The phrase booze and mischief left me worrying. I'd stumbled into what my mother referred to as the wrong crowd. But for the wrong crowd, they both seemed awfully smart. As she lit a cigarette off the butt of her previous one, she told me that the Colonel was smart but hadn't done much living when he got to Culver Creek. I got rid of the problem quickly, she smiled. By November I'd gotten him his first girlfriend, a perfectly nice non-weekday warrior named Janice. He dumped her after a month because she was too rich for his poverty-soaked blood, but whatever. We pulled our first prank this year. We filled classroom floor with thin layer of marbles. We progressed some since then, of course, she laughed. So Chip became the Colonel, the military-style planner of their pranks, and Alaska was ever Alaska, the larger-than-life creative force behind them. "You're smart like him," she said, quieter though and cuter, but I didn't even just say that because I love my boyfriend. "Yeah, you're not bad either," I said, overwhelmed by her compliment, "but I didn't just say that because I love my girlfriend. Oh wait, right, I don't have one." She laughed. "Yeah, don't worry, Pudge, if there's one thing I can get you, it's a girlfriend. Let's make a deal. You figure out what the labyrinth is and how to get out of it, and I'll get you laid." Deal? We shook on it. Later I walked towards the dorm circle beside Alaska. The cicadas hummed their one-note song, just as they had at home in Florida. She turned to me as we made our way through the darkness and said, "When you're walking at night, do you ever get creeped out, and even though it's silly and embarrassing, you just want to run home?" It seemed too secret and personal to admit to a virtual stranger, but I told her, yeah, totally. For a moment she was quiet, then she grabbed my hand, whispered, "Run, run, run," and took off, pulling me behind her. That is chapter 1 done. It's actually not, that's chapter 2 done. So we're up to chapter 3. You fucking